what is up, you guys? It's Kat, and today we are diving deep into the minds of industry leaders and innovators. Today we have a very special guest, Stefan Streckfus, the co-founder and CTO of Renewell Energy, where he has been at the forefront of renewable energy innovation for nearly 5 years. Stefan is not only a visionary in the energy sector, but is also a Westgate Fellow, bringing a wealth of experience and expertise to the table. Before co-founding Renewell Energy, Stefan worked as an energy engineer at Mawa Modular, where he designed scalable and adaptable renewable energy systems for use in refugee crises. His commitment to creating cost-effective and impactful solutions in the most challenging environments is truly commendable. Stefan also founded Streckworks, LLC, a consulting firm specializing in engineering, product, and business development across various fields. His diverse background includes leading equipment innovation teams at Restaurant Brands International, where he drove significant improvements in profitability, efficiency, and product quality for brands like Burger King and Tim Hortons. With a proven track record of innovation, leadership, and a passion for sustainable energy, Stefan Streckfus is here to share his insights, experiences, and the future of renewable energy. Please join me in welcoming our very special guest, Stefan, to the show. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. We're so excited to have you.
Thanks, Kat. Honestly, good to be here. Feel honored that you'd be interested in chatting with me.
Of course, of course. All right, so to set the stage, aside from what I had, shared with the audience to introduce you, is there anything that you'd like to share? Start off with, tell us about, let's set the stage at Renewell Energy. Tell us about Renewell Energy. What's going on there?
For sure. Yeah, so Renewell as an idea started about 6 years ago or so, without me involved at all, I should admit. It was my co-founder, Kemp Gregory, who's now our CEO. He got the idea talking to, that's not even totally true. So the idea originated with our third co-founder, whose name is Walker Cole, who still works with us. He got this light, this gravity light that he had seen online that basically a really cool concept where it is intended for places that are not yet electrified. And if you want to have a light in your home, in that case, one option is to buy this gravity light where you fill up a bag with water or sand or whatever you can find that's heavy. And if you lift that bag up to the ceiling once every 15 minutes or half hour, it then slowly lowers, which turns a little generator and powers a light bulb.
Amazing.
He saw that idea and he was like, man, wells are extremely deep. Why don't we do something like that in an oil well? And brought that idea to one of his childhood friends, Kemp Gregory, who's now our CEO, and they started playing around with this idea. And from there, Kemp and I were fast friends in grad school. We would get lunch pretty regularly, and I remember, there was one random lunch where Kemp mentioned he had started playing with this idea. I got all hype about it. A few months later, we had brought the idea into a class over at Stanford called Stanford Climate Ventures, and from there it just started accelerating. We definitely have had a lot of ups and downs along the way, but now we're 6 years in, and we've built out the first full scale device of this concept, getting it running out in California right now, and getting ready for a fundraising round to try and build a bunch more.
That's so cool. That is so cool. So help me understand, the product itself is literally a light device that is used in oil wells, or do you use the depth of the oil well to power something that is at ground level?
Great question, and totally merits clarification from the way I explained it. The light was the inspiration. We don't light any lights. Well, maybe there's some teeny tiny little LEDs on our device, but it is much more, it is energy storage that serves the grid. And so the idea of energy storage in general is that it's useful today, much more useful in the future as wind and solar start to proliferate. And that really comes into this idea that we don't control when the wind blows or when the sun shines. And people want electricity when they want electricity. So we need something that can hold the energy that is produced during times when there's a lot of solar or wind, and carry it over to the times when people want to use it.
And there's not. Like nighttime, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so cool. Super cool. So then you use the depth of oil wells to essentially store power that is generated conceivably from perhaps a solar panel.
That's the
And
idea.
then, oh my gosh, that is so cool.
Yeah.
That is so cool. So interestingly enough, have you heard of this person named Bill Gross?
Yes.
Okay, so he had a similar, like he was working with a similar idea as well in order to store energy because his whole entire, like as you guys had identified, the storage of, like it's easy now, you know, after an evolution of the journey into renewable energies. Like it's easy to capture that solar energy, and it's even easy to use the solar energy while the sun is shining, which is ironic because, you know, the sun's shining already. So anyways, but at nighttime, you need to be able to store that energy in order to be able to use it when the sun isn't shining, when you don't have that ongoing supply of power. So this is brilliant. And so his idea was to build a big, huge tower on ground. But I love how you guys are using oil wells. And I mean, how deep is an oil well? Like
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's a fact that usually surprises people. And it's also something that really sets us apart from that energy vault concept you're referring to. And so, and yeah, tons of respect for what they're building out. It helps us as well because it helps to educate people on the potential. There's an engineering pun in there using the word potential, but the potential around gravity storage in general. But so, yeah, depth. We're talking the average depth of a well within the United States is about a mile deep. So there's a long ways down. The flip side is that they're pretty narrow. So we're talking about like this. So somewhere between 5.5 inch and 7 inch OD of the casing that's down there. So somewhere between 5 and 6.5 inches is what we have to work with. So we end up, what I think is a pretty crazy and cool engineering problem. How do you build a weight that takes advantage of this mile of travel that it can have, so that it ends up being something where we're piecing together a very, very long weight that's extremely narrow and finding a way for it to move easily through this narrow tube that's underground.
That's crazy. So how much weight do you need to have in order to create enough energy to do something with?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's an interesting balancing act because when you get down to the reason that was a lame engineering pun is that it's all potential energy. And so potential energy is mass times gravity times height. So you can play with mass, you can play with height in order to get whatever end result you want. We tend to focus on the shallower wells due to the way our business model works. And so we're somewhere in the order of 25 to 40,000 pounds that we're looking to suspend. And we're moving it on the order of 2/3 of a mile. So it is a realm where gravity storage has a lot of potential because it's naturally occurring. It's a resource that's easy to access. You can make everything out of mechanical materials so that they break down on a much longer time scale. But the flip side is that you've got to move a lot of weight a long distance in order to have a significant amount of storage.
That's right. And then it also has to come up at some point in time once it's reached the bottom. And so that also would, forgive my ignorance, but that would take away from the energy that you're actually producing, or does it, do you already account for that, or?
So yeah, an extremely common misunderstanding here that I really should have called out before is, so we're not generating any electricity, neither us nor any other energy storage company, where we're all just storage. So there is a net loss in the process, which is an important factor to include when planning out a grid system, is that there are situations where overbuilding solar or wind makes more sense than creating energy storage that carries it across because you do lose electricity during the process. But
still, though,
sorry.
Yeah, the storage of energy is extremely important because, I mean, you can't always just be relying on capturing the energy and then not, to me, that's a huge waste. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, totally. And there's just times when it's not possible too, and you don't. Yeah, all sorts of downsides to overbuilding the generation infrastructure. But yeah, there's a balancing act in there somewhere for sure.
100%, 100%. So who are your customers? Like, are they retail customers or who are your customers?
Yeah, an interesting question, and also something that makes our concept a little weird. Also makes our concept pretty fun because we really live on both sides of the aisle in many senses. So we've got two different value streams that we create when we turn a well into a gravity storage device. One side is on the oil and gas side, and the other side is on the electricity side. So electricity side is what we were talking about, so I'll tap on that one first. And we've really got a wide variety, a spectrum of potential customers, all the way from the utility themselves, all the way down to the person who owns the field where we're installing. There's also some really cool concepts that are starting to grow out there that are centered around this idea of turning these old oil fields into modern industrial parks, which I think has a ton of promise because they're sort of brownfield sites that have a lot of potential. They've got a lot of energy infrastructure built out in them, but they just haven't been the focus in the past because they've been producing an asset that's extremely useful. But as more fields retire, there's greater and greater opportunity there. So if that's the energy side of our business equation, the other side is the remediation of these wells. And so what we offer to the well owner is an opportunity to, instead of going through the traditional path of remediation, we offer what we think is an even more robust remediation solution at a lower cost. And the way we do that is traditionally say that there's something on the order of 10 major steps within the remediation process. Well, the reality is that only the first 3 or 4 steps, depending on how you count them, are creating the environmental safety that the remediation is intended to create. And so that environmental safety is caused by sealing the well and stopping all the nasty stuff down under the earth from coming up on surface. And so when we retrofit a well, first thing we do is we seal the well. We do those first 3 to 4 steps and then defer the rest of that process as we monitor the well to ensure containment while we're using it. So that really takes the situation where we're spending an incredible amount of money to rip out all the infrastructure that exists, to instead spend significantly less money, install something that's really useful to mankind for the foreseeable future, and use that infrastructure rather than paying money to tear it out.
Amazing, amazing. That's incredible. Like I've never really thought about like when we talk about oil and gas, and forgive me, I know little about oil and gas, like from an engineering point of view, or even, from the operations point of view. I'm more the IT bit. Like I can put in an IT system that manages your O&G company. But the remediation of the well is sort of a newer concept to me. So I didn't even know that there's sort of 10 major steps that need to be done. So to level set, because perhaps many of our listeners might not be as well versed into the oil and gas industry on the whole, when does a well need to be remediated? Is it during, or like how do they know, like is it when help me understand. When does that remediation occur?
No, that's a great question. And I think this is one of the ones where I mentioned that we live in both worlds. We live fully in the renewable energy world. We also live in the oil and gas world. There's no way around it. Which is a
beautiful sort of coming together of two very opposite ideas, isn't it?
Yeah. And we love that. We fully believe that this is a situation where both sides win without a doubt. And it's interesting, even the founding team, we're split on where we come from, whether it's from the oil and gas world or environmental activism side. And yeah, that's the core of who we are and who we want to be. And I think, but with that, there also come times like this question where I'm almost guaranteed to step on somebody's toes as I answer it. So I'm gonna try and paint a complete picture as I do, which is there's the world of ideals and then there's the world of pragmatism, and
100%.
Of course they conflict all the time.
Of course, there's got to be this balance, for sure.
Yeah, and I think the ideal world is easy to describe and imagine, and that's one where the second that oil or gas is no longer being produced, at a value to humanity, then we would stop production, we would remediate that well fully, and then it would get to a state where we feel it is safe to assume that it will never cause negative environmental impact again. That's the ideal.
And how long does that take usually? Like, are we talking years? Are we talking decades? Are we talking months?
Oh, so the time between when it stops production,
right.
Well, I guess, there's probably worth a little call out here, and that's sort of where I was headed, but the actual P&A process is quick. A really complicated well could take a significant amount of time, but while it's not really complex, we're talking a few weeks.
Wow, okay.
And really, like, the process itself of P&Aing the well could probably be done in a week, depending on which well. But then there's the world of how pragmatism comes in, which is very, very much extremely important to anything that happens, where,
of course,
often, and especially if you look at the United States, wells at one point stop production, but later some invention occurs, where we realize invention occurs or price changes on the commodity they're producing, and it makes a lot of sense to start pulling that resource back out of the ground. And so because of that, there's good reason to delay the remediation of the well after the day that it stops producing. Sort of the next layer of that is, whenever you feel that you are really confident that the well will never produce again, then that's the time to remediate. Fortunately, you can hear, as I describe that it's a difficult target to draw on a map. How do you predict what technology will do in the future? Usually when people try, they're wrong. And so I think that's one cause of the situation we're in. There's definitely other causes, but the situation we're in is one that I also think is worth referencing as we discuss this idea, because it's the core of what we're trying to do as a company, is to help out the situation where there's 2.6 million inactive wells in the United States today.
Really?
And when you take that 2.6 million and multiply it by the price tag associated with remediating the wells, it's an incredible amount of liability. And this is something that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but you just sparked something. How much does it actually cost to remediate a well? Like, not what you're doing, but traditionally, what would it cost?
Yeah,
I know that's a hard question to answer. It's like, on average, or maybe.
Yeah, trying to, again, paint a relatively full picture. If I had to take a stab at what the national average is, I would say it's probably something like $60,000. However, there is an enormous spectrum that exists on, largely having to do with the way that it's regulated. So if California is the upper end of the, call it, strictness spectrum, their average is probably closer to $80,000. I should have an exact number on that, but that would be my guess off the top of my head. But then you get down on the other end of the spectrum, where perhaps the regulator doesn't go out to visit the remediation effort to check it. Perhaps there's less cement required to be inside the well. Perhaps there's less levels of cement required to be inside the well. There's perhaps the casing, the steel tube that goes down through the entirety of the well. Perhaps that doesn't need to be torn out at the surface. There's all sorts of different standards that could lead to that price being far, far lower. Sort of in the 20.
But that price to me is actually lower than I expected. Like, I had it in the six figures in my head. So basically, and again, forgive my ignorance on this, but essentially when you're remediating an old oil well, if you were not to do what you are doing, which I think is a very amazing thing, you're basically filling in the hole, a very deep hole, with cement. I suppose, like, as to your point, you have to take out whatever's in there, like the big metal tube thing, the casing, right? Yeah. And then you have to fill it up with something, and apparently that something is cement, I guess?
Yeah. And thank goodness we've transitioned to cement. There's definitely a bunch of wells out there that have, like, old trees in them and all sorts of random junk and attempts to seal the well. But we've moved beyond that era. But I'd say it's also worth noting here, as we start to talk about averages, is that our concept is now focused on the averages. In general, if a well is really low cost to remediate, we view that as a pretty small problem in relation to the larger scope.
Gotcha.
What's really difficult are the wells that are expensive to remediate, and there's a lot of those. I mean, you take 2.6 million, and if it was a normal distribution, those tails are still pretty meaty. So
Right.
we're really focused on the wells that are most expensive to clean up. And that, yeah, depending on where you're looking, there's easily thousands, we think over 100,000 wells that make a lot of sense. And that would be everything that's north of, depends on what time in our company's life you want to look at it. But today, we'd say anything that's above $200,000 is within our sweet
Is
spot.
worth it. Okay.
We're trying to provide a solution, and then in the future we'll get down to where the wells that are in the $100,000 range make a lot of sense.
Gotcha. For sure. Because as you develop your technology, it'll be cheaper to provide, and so therefore the value of remediation, will come down, as opposed to being it's only worth it when it would cost you $200K otherwise to fill in the hole, right? Well, why not do this and have a renewable storage place, renewable storage, a storage place for your renewable energy. That's amazing.
Yeah. And part of the reason that we're so obsessed with the wells that are expensive is those are the wells that the oil and gas companies are incentivized not to clean up. So that is, if depending on which state you're in, all the regulations look different, which is annoying for us and confusing. But it comes out to where a lot of the time you'll be in a situation where you have to clean up, let's say 100 wells. And you're a business owner, what are you going to choose? You're going to choose the 100 wells that are $15,000, $20,000, and whatever you have that's $500,000, $600,000 to clean up.
Who cares?
Step off and delay.
Right.
Hopefully the next person in your role has to deal with that problem.
Right. That's insane. It didn't even occur to me that well owners would not want it to clean up. But that's a real problem.
And I wouldn't describe it as not wanting to clean up. I think that in general, the oil and gas companies we've worked with are all very passionate about their stewardship of the environment and the role that they play. But it's really just that butting heads of idealism and pragmatism where people are forced to make decisions they don't want to make.
Right. Well, there's always bigger fish to fry.
Yeah.
Right on. That's so incredible. I'm just blown away at your obviously your passion for this, but just the whole entire idea. I think it's just it's world changing. It absolutely is. I'm so excited about this. So we talked about customers, the electricity, and the direct customers that you help are essentially oil owners. Who uses that energy? What is that energy that you store? Do you sell it back to the grid, or is it up to your customers, or what happens there?
Yeah, I'd say that there's a very worthwhile divide. I mentioned that we can service a lot of different entities with the energy storage services we provide. And I like to group it into two worlds. One world is when we're serving the field that we're located within. So that would be decreasing the electricity bill of that field. That for us is what we view as a stepping stone. We really start to make, I guess economically it makes a lot more sense once we get to a size where we're servicing the larger grid, or if it happens to be that industrial park future I described briefly before. But when we're reaching out to service the broader grid, the grid is an interesting engineering feat to discuss, in that people love to talk about the idea of you're putting out the electricity, who's receiving it? The reality is it's more like a giant bucket of water that no matter where you're pouring in, you have no idea where your electrons end up. And so we would be servicing anybody that is on that same, I guess, distribution system, or it starts at the distribution system and then really servicing the larger grid as a whole. And that could take a lot of faces, where it's stabilizing the grid, where it's making sure that it remains at the right frequency, all the way down to making sure that people have the power they need coming out of in their homes. And so I'd say that the way that I tend to look at it is the utility, in order to provide the services it needs, requires X, Y, and Z generation, flexibility, consumption profiles, and we help them serve everyone.